Hi, I'm Ross Mayfield, investment strategy analyst with Baird, and we are back for another weekly video with our friends at Strategas. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Washington policy analyst Jeannette Lowe to talk a little DC action with us. Jeannette, how are you doing today?
I am great. Ross, how are you?
I'm doing really well. We always love having you all on, especially when there's a lot going on, and there definitely is right now. But I do want to start with something that actually just ended, or at least for a short time, which is the debt ceiling. Can kicked kind of down the road there. How do you see that playing out as far as the near-term path for policy, and what will that mean for investors come December?
Yeah, it's interesting. We had this theme of there being a September to remember with all of these issues coming up before Congress with government funding, the debt ceiling, the infrastructure bill, and the reconciliation bill. And we sort of have a little bit of temporary resolution on government funding and the debt ceiling, with those two items now being moved into December. So we still have things that might come up, and it still might be a little bit of a heavy lift in December to get those things accomplished. One of the things that we are looking at, though, is that the debt ceiling may actually not need to be lifted in December. So that might take a little bit of the pressure out at the end of the year. Might actually be more of a January story, but it kind of shows that we don't really have a lot of resolution on any of these issues yet. And even with the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill, those things still aren't really taken care of, and they're being much more delayed than I think people were anticipating. So that could actually kind of keep moving forward as we get into December. All of these issues might kind of come back together as something that Congress has to work out and figure out how it's going to resolve them.
Well, at least a few weeks of reprieve then. But speaking of the reconciliation bill, so that is well, at least as proposed, $3.5 trillion spending bill with a whole host of issues. That is likely going to come down. You all have been talking about that for a long time. Can you talk about where you think the headline number might land now, and what are some of the first programs that might be on the chopping block if that does have to come down by $1 trillion+ or so?
Right. So we have been saying that we think that the overall bill is going to come in more around $2 trillion from that $3.5 trillion. But there's still some wiggle room, maybe even gets pushed down a little bit further. I think you might have some other things that might come into play here. So for instance, what happens in the Virginia gubernatorial election might play a role in this. What happens with a third quarter GDP print, that might have an impact on what these discussions and negotiations end up being. But what we're looking at is Democrats are probably ultimately going to focus on three key areas. So they're going to focus on green energy and climate change. They're going to focus on healthcare, and they're going to focus on social supports. So things like the child tax credit. That's a really big, important piece for the Democrats. They want to keep that going forward for several more years. So we think that's something that's important that's going to stay in this package. You still might get something like some sort of paid family leave or some sort of childcare, maybe a temporary program that could be in place as well. Because again, that kind of goes to the key components that Democrats are kind of looking for ahead of the 2022 midterm elections. On the healthcare side, we think that the biggest focus is probably going to be on the expansion and the extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies that was put into place through the American Rescue Plan back in March. This is kind of a top priority for Speaker Pelosi. It goes to Democrats' overall message of trying to keep coverage for individuals. So we think that that has something that's really going to stay in the package. Also, Medicaid expansion for the states that haven't expanded Medicaid yet, and giving those individuals coverage. We think that's another key priority. Something that might be on the chopping block on that side is Medicare benefits. So they're trying to put in benefits for hearing and vision and dental. It's expensive. Dental in particular is currently expected not phase in until 2028. But there still might be, so that could be cut, or they could try to do something like provide 1-year vouchers for those services. And then there's also drug pricing is kind of a key component in that too. We still think the Democrats want to do something on drug pricing, but if the size of the package comes down, that also means you need less pay-fors. And so that means you don't necessarily need as strict of drug pricing changes either. So we could still see something there, but maybe not the worst case scenario for that industry. And then on climate as well, we think there's going to be a big focus there. This is kind of the Democrats' chance if they want to do something on climate, particularly if they might lose the House and or the Senate going into 2023. And they have this UN climate summit coming up in Scotland in November. So they probably want to do something for that. So we still think they're going to be focused on, electric vehicles, trying to either give rebates to individuals, trying to have the federal government buy greener vehicles. There's going to be a focus on trying to extend production investment tax credits and things like solar, energy storage, wind, biofuels, things like that. And there's going to be some other things that they're going to try to do. We think maybe a methane tax might be one of those that they're going to be looking to implement. And they're going to have to kind of figure out how much can they do with trying to have a smaller package. But we definitely think, incentivizing green energy is going to be a key part of this.
Well, it's definitely not lacking for moving parts. And that's why we really appreciate having you guys on the team to dive into the details there of what's probably thousands of pages of proposed legislation. So Jeannette, I want to thank you so much. I hope we'll have you back on soon, because there's never a shortage of things to talk about, but we really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks.